Good evening. We'd like to welcome you out to our Rancho Board of Education meeting for Monday, April 25th, 2022. This meeting is now called to order. If all would arise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Kim, can you take a roll call for us?
Yes, I can. President Galbraith.
Present.
Vice President Morgan.
Present.
Secretary Scott.
Present.
Board Member Tripp.
Present.
And Board Member Tyler.
Present.
We have a quorum 5-0.
Okay, thank you. All right, we'd like to welcome everyone out to our meeting tonight. It's always so nice to have everyone here in person and to see so many in the boardroom. So, and so good to see Jenna. I haven't seen you, I feel like, in a long time. So there's a call out to you for a moment. It's so nice to have everyone here. And we'll start our meeting with some comments by our superintendent of schools, Dr. V. Sue Cleveland.
Good evening, everyone. We're very glad you're with us this evening, and I have just some very general remarks, and then we have several really important items that we want to get to right away on our agenda. One of the first items is the redistricting of board member districts. As you well know, every 10 years following a United States Census, all public bodies are expected to redistrict their official seats to ensure that you have a more equitable representation that's based on population. The board has spent a lot of time looking at a variety of maps. They were able to narrow that down to 3 maps, and those have been available for the public to review and comment on. Technical assistance for this effort was provided by Michael Sharp with Research and Polling. We've appreciated his help and assistance. His job is to keep us legal and make sure that we are meeting all of the requirements. Also want to thank the additional support that's been provided by Beth Pendergrass, who's kind of organized this effort for the district, and Kim Vesley, who's worked a lot of hours on producing additional maps. So this evening, the school board is going to be asked to actually consider the official adoption of a redistricting plan for the Rio Rancho School District. There were some process and a few concerns. The district sent out maps and the supporting information to over 15,000 homes, asking for public comment. The Rio Rancho Observer also provided a feature article on how to read the maps and explain how constituents could provide public comments to the Board of Education. Those maps were also displayed at the Loma Colorado Library so that people could go in and look at them. And they also had some online opportunities as well. Really, the biggest concern that was raised in the community was one that we had tried to address, but not everyone had heard that, was the fear that these new maps would result in new school attendance boundaries. And of course, they will not have any impact whatsoever on our school attendance zones. So no children will be moved as a result of this redistricting process. We have a presentation this evening on the budget. A proposed budget was presented to the board on April 11th for your review and discussion, and give you time to look at the budget. If you have any questions, there'll be an opportunity to ask those questions this evening. The budget will be presented by Michael Baker, our Chief Operations Officer, and David Vigil, who is our Executive Director of Finance. You will be asked this evening to approve a preliminary budget that needs to be sent to the Public Education Department by 11 o'clock a.m. on May the 11th. And certainly, this is a preliminary budget. So if some things were to change between now and the start of the new fiscal year, the Board of Education could still make some changes in the proposed budget. And also the Public Education Department carefully reviews every district's budget to ensure that the budget is compliant with all of the state regulations, and particularly with any of the legislative requirements or mandated, and there were a great number of those this school year. There's some takeaways, and Mike will expand on all of that information. There are several areas that have had an influence on the 2022-23 school budget. Certainly, we were really pleased with the state stepping forward with a compensation package that would provide raises that have been long needed, and our teachers in the state in particular have been underpaid for quite a long time. So we were really glad to see that. One of the challenges, though, is after you run anything through the formula, which is the way money is distributed in New Mexico. And if you aren't aware of that, I would want you to know that 95% of our budget comes directly from Santa Fe. That's why we're so involved in the legislative process. That's why we, watch what's going on in legislative committees and the session, because it determines 95% of our budget. There's also a formula that the money flows through, and that formula does result in different amounts being awarded to different size districts and different districts in terms of demographics. And so when you get through the formula, not everyone gets exactly the same, but we have to check whenever we get these mandates to see if that's completely covered. In some cases, we don't think it was completely covered, but we certainly are grateful for that increase for our staff. There were things such as we have to pay more, as does the employee, in funding ERB contributions. There are medical benefits increases this year that have been mandated. The state held the line on that for a while, and they kept telling us they were holding it during COVID, but eventually we were going to have to see those premiums go up, and they would go up pretty significantly, and we certainly have seen that occur for this budget, and we're expecting increases over the next couple of years. I think everyone is aware of rising costs for utilities and certainly for fuel. That impacts us a lot in terms of diesel and our school buses, as well as other fixed costs. And when we get into an inflationary period, then things begin to go up regularly, and we have to try to guess what that's going to look like. Transportation, no surprises there. We're still short in transportation, and we're also short in instructional materials, which was really a very big disappointment. We are hearing that they're going to try again to get some additional funding during the regular session. We really hope that that is the case. We do believe that the budget being proposed to the board this evening meets all of the state requirements. Some of the challenges that we're facing for the next year, as we look at a budget, we've had a lot of conversations about this with Cabinet. The amount of future vacancy savings is unknown, but we know we've had higher vacancy savings the last couple of years through the pandemic. And certainly we know that we will not get a major increase in the SEG funds like we did this year in January or February. The state has withheld some money. They always do as a safety factor in case other things happen. So they will be withholding some of the money that was allocated from the state legislature, but certainly not nearly as much as they held back this year. So we're getting more of the money up front, and that's good because then we'll be able to use it all year. But we also can expect to see big increase around the first of 2023. We will get something. We have made progress filling vacancies for both school and departmental positions. Certainly the increased compensation has helped with that, but we have quite a ways to go. It's been interesting in our 2 strategic planning sessions. The number one issue identified by the community was to fill our teacher vacancies, and we're working very hard on that. And we will be sharing with you some of the things that HR and others, C&I, have been working on to try to ensure that we do have a highly qualified teacher in every classroom. We also are going to need to secure additional revenue stream to be able to open the Career Technical Center for next year. And so we need funding for renovations, equipment, staffing, and operational expenses. We need the community's help. We need you to speak up on our behalf for that. We need to be very vocal. We need to let the state know 2 things. We need help, very much. We need help with the things that need to go in the building. As I said, the renovations, the equipment, but you also have to have money to operate the building. And so we are working still with C&M to perhaps do a partnership that might offset some of those costs. And that partnership seems to be moving along nicely right now. We have another very important item this evening, and that is the adoption of our K-8 instructional materials for English language arts. We are short approximately $1 million to cover that adoption. That's somewhat discouraging given the fact that we had a court ruling that the state was to pay for that. We've been told again that they're going to make another effort, as I said, during the regular session to try to find additional money to pay for the adoption. Obviously, English language arts, elementary and middle school, is one of the most important adoptions that we have that impacts student performance and achievement. And so we feel it's just absolutely essential that we adopt and move forward with that. We just hope there will be some additional funding coming to help pay for some of that. Our current materials are very dated, and they are not aligned to some of the new PED program initiatives like MLSS. We need to have that alignment. We need to provide our students with those tools to be able, and teachers, to do the job that we are asking them to do. Carl Leppelman, Chief Academic Officer, will make the recommendation, and I think he has some other staff that may be working with him on that, and they will present their recommendation in terms of the materials that they would like to see the board officially adopt. I would say that this process is time-consuming, but it's a very thorough, very fair, and I think you will be very impressed with what has gone into selecting the materials for English language arts. We will, due to a major renovation at Rio Rancho Middle School, and it will be the largest of the last set of renovations that we have from the current bond, there will be a recommendation to close this campus to transfers for next year. Renee Salcedo, who is our secondary school improvement officer, will present that information to the board this evening. The renovations at Martin Luther King Junior Elementary and Puesta del Sol Elementary are now completed. Janice Chenault, who is our elementary school improvement officer, will present a request to reopen those schools to transfers. I would remind the board that we in this state have an open enrollment statute, and it requires school districts to accept out-of-district transfers, except for limited and short-term needs such as renovations, or there can be some other things as well. The bill basically says that all children should have an opportunity to attend a public school except for unusual, extraordinary circumstances, and we certainly comply with that. I would also have you know that out-of-district transfers have been really important in keeping our district's enrollment status stable. And one of the things we have certainly wanted to remain is stable or growing district. We certainly don't want to be in a situation as a declining district, and certainly our out-of-district transfers have helped with that. I would also share with the board that we have a lot of transfers that come out of this district to other places as well. And so we have kind of a reciprocal agreement. Usually those kinds of transfers are based on childcare, being close to grandparents, other kinds of things like that, but transfers do go, they do go both ways. And, I just want to say so much time and effort has gone into the items that will be presented to the board this evening. I want to have a very special thanks to the board members and staff who have helped with the redistricting, the budget, and the instructional materials adoption. We appreciate all of the time and effort that has gone into this effort. And I would stand for any questions or comments.
I have a quick question for you. On the community help, what would be the best thing for our community to do? You said they need to go out and talk. Would it just to talk to our legislators, or are there other things that you feel that they could do for that community help for CTE?
I think that there are several things. Certainly continued letters to our legislative delegation. I would say they've been very supportive. I don't get a feeling we have to convince them at all of supporting it. They supported it this year with their capital dollars. And presented a check to us at the Innovation Night at the CTE Center. But I think it's important to them that they continue to hear from the community. that this is a priority for them. The other I would strongly recommend are letters to the governor and the lieutenant governor are just critical. The executive plays a key role, and that's going to be particularly the case as we see these federal infrastructure dollars coming into New Mexico. The executive will have a lot of input into how that money is spent. So certainly letters to the governor and lieutenant governor, and then to leaders of the committees, particularly the Legislative Finance Committee and LESC, which you can find on the state's website. Letters to those leaders are on those committees is really important because they make many of the decisions about where the money will go and how it's distributed. And then last, but certainly not least, if you have ties with legislators from other places in the state, we need to talk to them too, because ultimately it goes to the floor for a vote and we need people to support it, not only from Rio Rancho, but from Albuquerque, for example, who will benefit greatly from this CTE Center and workforce development. For example, Las Cruces is very interested in a CTE Center, having the very same conversations that we are right now. And so certainly legislators in other parts of the state that you may have a personal tie with, please contact them as well in hopes that we can get enough votes to see that we can get a revenue stream for CTE. And let me just share briefly what I mean by that. What I mean by that is that in most states, you have a dedicated amount that comes through the formula for career technical education. It's not blended into everything else because CTE is expensive. The equipment that goes into a career technical center, it's expensive. Getting instructors who come in that teach those specialized classes is expensive. And so we need an additional revenue stream so that we don't take away from our existing schools and programs. And I know that's always a concern when we have something new to open, are the existing sites who have needs too and don't want to see their needs not considered. But we need to just be like the other states and across the country and get funding strictly for CTE and not at the expense of existing program. So anyone you know in state government, anyone you know in the governor's office, anyone you know certainly in the New Mexico legislature, if you would reach out to them, that would be very, very helpful. And we're going to try very hard. The governor we hear may be coming to Rio Rancho in the very near future. And we're really hoping that not only can she visit a school site, but also that we might get her over to that facility so she can see what tremendous potential it has for this entire region.
That's great. Thank you. Jeff Morgan, any questions?
No questions at all. Thank you.
Jessica Tyler, any questions?
No questions or comments.
Okay. And we have Gary Tripp and Noreen Scott. If you guys have any questions, I'll give you a second to say.
I have no questions. Thank you.
No questions, Madam President. Thank you, Dr. Cleveland.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Thank you, Dr. Cleveland. Appreciate it. Okay, so moving on to item E, to approve the prioritized agenda and proposed time allocations. We do have one item that needs to be removed, correct, Dr. Cleveland? I believe it's item D.
It's item D, and we just need a little more time to finish that up and working with the city of Rio Rancho, and we would like to bring that to the board at the next meeting.
Okay, so remove item D. Anything else from the board? Any discussion?
No, Madam President, this is Board Member Tyler speaking, and I'd like to make a motion to approve the prioritized agenda and proposed time allocations with the removal of item D.
This is Noreen Scott. I will second.
Okay, so we have a motion by Jessica Tyler and a second by Noreen Scott. And I'm going to go ahead and do a roll call vote on all these just because we have some board members that are virtual tonight. So do you mind taking a roll call for us? Roll call vote.
Vice President. 1, 2. Can you guys hear me?
I can hear you. I'm just not sure if it's going through the intercom system.
It's not going through the intercom.
1, 2.
There.
Okay.
There it
There
is.
we go.
Sorry about that. Vice President Morgan,
Yes.
Secretary Scott,
Yes.
losing my mind here. Board Member Tripp,
Yeah.
Board Member Tyler,
Yes.
and President Galbraith.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Thank you. Okay, moving into our public comments. So we don't have any public comments that signed up to do public comment in person, but we do have a few that came in through our website. Give me a moment to pull those up. I have 7 down. Is that still correct? Nothing else came in that I didn't see? Okay. So we have 7 public comment that came in through our public comment form that's on our board page. I will go through and summarize those comments. Our first one was from Annalisa Mendoza. She's asking to view the school board redistricting proposals. Our second came from Justine Garcia, wondering if a school is poor performing, if you can pick another better performing school that's in the district. Our third, Corey Andres, in reference to the school board boundaries, she recommended that we keep communities in one single district as much as possible. Jolynn Pruitt. Let me actually read part of that one because I had a hard time summarizing it. Give me 1 second. Make sure this is yes. This high school graduating class of 2022 includes students of the very first kindergarten cohort of the Rio Rancho Public Schools Montessori program at Sandia Vista Elementary School. Very cool. She just also put congratulations in there. She gave a history of the program. She gave a thank you to many of the staff over the years. And she hopes that as a district that we will take time to recognize the students that came from that Montessori program. Our next one came from Robert Matoka, asking if the school district teaches critical race theory. Also is very concerned with his daughter's classes at Rio Rancho High School, gives examples of teachers on cell phones and receiving takeout in their classroom. Our sixth one comes from Andres Areola. He's a senior at Cleveland, feels that he hasn't received the help that he needs to graduate with his class this year and is upset with some of the staff at his school. And our last is Paula Blograve. She's asking why graduations are being held in the morning. Many teachers would love to attend but are unable to attend in the morning and would have to take a personal day from school. So that is our public comment that we have received over the last couple of weeks. If anyone's wishing to give public comment, please, we love to hear your public comments. You can do so by going to our Rio Rancho Public Schools and then going to the board page. And there's a form there where you can fill out and give public comment, which we read through. Okay, we will now go into, we'll start with reports. We will start, our first report is for the fiscal year 23 adoption of the K through 8 English Language Arts ELA Instructional Materials. Carl Leppelman, our Chief Academic Officer, Joy Morales, our Executive Director of Elementary Curriculum and Instruction, and Todd Resch, our Executive Director of Secondary Curriculum and Instruction. It is hard to say all of those things. I just want to put that out there. They are here to present to us. Thank you.
We're a powerful, I should turn it on, huh? Testing. Oh, you can hear it. Sorry. We're in the wind too much. Madam President, members of the board, Dr. Cleveland, we have spent a year-long process looking at instructional materials, and as Dr. Cleveland mentioned, it's very thorough. When I think about a couple of people here, you know, Joey Morales, since she's been in our district, I think this may be the first time that Todd Resch has been in front of you face to face. I think the first time you've seen him, well, most of the time has been virtual. Is that correct? So we want to welcome Todd Resch. It's his first year in our department, coming from Albuquerque Public Schools. So thank you, Todd, for all you've done in this process. And the first slide really is tonight is the K through 8 elementary arts ELA adoption, and then a reading intervention at 6-8. And really the process really depends on the talent of our teachers. So we really reach out and talk with our principal and say, okay, bring your most talented, highly qualified staff to the table to look at the materials. It also depends on gathering feedback from our community, which we have done, and you'll hear more about that this evening. It is based on our teachers in terms of what tools do they need in their classroom to really help students understand and develop the standards. And I want a sincere thank you to all those involved in this whole process, the teachers at the school level. We had principals involved, parents, the C&I coordinators, and of course Todd Resch and Joey Morales. So what's our purpose? The first slide there is really to identify high quality materials, because I think Dr. Cleveland mentioned earlier, there are two things we do that are the most important things we do in this district. That would be hire a talented teacher, a teacher in the classroom, make sure we have that consistency. And the second one is really give them the tools they need in the curriculum to do their job. That ensures that all students have access to that engaging, rigorous, we know it's on target instruction. So in every classroom, we know that instruction is where it should be. And those best practices are seen in all classrooms. And that making sure it's meaningful in terms of students learning. This slide you may have seen before. It looks a little different. I asked Joy, Mrs. Morales, if she would change it up just a little bit. I think the colors might be different. But ultimately, you were all former students. One of the things that happened to me when I went to school is we come into the year and say, well, that wasn't on the test. And don't you hate that? Even a college professor might say, you know, you come up to take the test, the assessment, and you go, where'd that come from? Well, we don't want our students to feel that way. We want a backwards plan, making sure students, what teachers are teaching are going to be assessed, and students need to know what exemplar looks like. What does it look like to be excellent? And so we work at that, and we align our written, taught, and assessed curriculum. I won't go into the theory behind it, because tonight, Marzano really is the guru around looking at guaranteed viable curriculum. It's really around two things: the opportunity to learn, which that alignment I talked about, and second is that time. Is there time in that schedule? We give teachers so much, particularly at the elementary. It's so full that have we really looked at those power standards, those essential standards, to make sure they're really truly learned at a deep level so students can be successful at the next grade level. So again, I want to thank you for hearing the recommendations tonight, and I'd like to turn over to Joy Morales to talk about degrees of certainty. Is that correct?
Yep, the
Yep.
5 levels of
5 levels of
certainty. Thank you so much, Madam President, Dr. Cleveland, and members of the board. So before we get too much further into the presentation, what I'd like to share is that the work that our coordinators for all K-12 adoptions as we go through the 5 levels of certainty. The reason why we go through this process is because we all bring our own biases and our own opinions to the table with what we want to teach in our classrooms with the curriculum. And what we aim to do is to remove those biases and opinions and really get to the heart of number 3 and number 4, where we're looking at making sure that we are completely objective and that we are completely, we have evidence to support our decisions. So as we move into the K-5 adoption, I want to start by acknowledging the 2 coordinators who oversaw the ELA adoption. So I have Heidi Whirling and Christy Casada here, and I'm going to make them stand. Believe it or not, they're like, what the heck? Thank you so much. As you know, there's been many challenges trying to get a team of teachers together during a pandemic. And so Heidi and Christy bounced lots of ideas off of each other, and we were able to make it happen and have teachers present for this adoption. With that, we had many members that came and were fully committed, and we have a few of those members here today too, and I am going to make them stand. I'm sorry, can you please stand? And these are our elementary folks who came, as well as, 2 slides. And I just think it's really important to acknowledge them tonight because it has been a year-long process, and they've given up classroom time to be here and are really committed to this. So with these slides, you'll see the additional members of our committee. They're central to our teacher-led adoption process. Heidi and Christy worked to make sure that we had members from every school and that our members represented a broad range of staff. We had community members, including general education, special education teachers. We had biliteracy teachers, ELD coordinators, ed techs. We even had a parent from Enchanted Hills that served on the committee as well. So they make a huge impact in this adoption. They give up a lot of their time, and they hold themselves to very high expectations. So they evaluate resources carefully and objectively. They work collaboratively to weigh the needs of both the teachers and the students. And then they also act as committee leader at their school sites. They're that contact person responsible for disseminating information. So it's great to have such a great team. You can go ahead and advance. All right, so this evening, the Rio Rancho Public Schools Elementary English Language Arts Instructional Materials Adoption Committee is seeking consideration and approval for Amplify Core Knowledge Language Arts. The work of this began by creating a vision that represents our goals for our students here in Rio Rancho. And it served to guide our work as we collaborated to make the best selection to support the success of our students in English language arts. From here, we identified some local priorities. So based on the knowledge of the strengths and needs of our students, the teachers on this committee identified 5 priorities to guide the adoption process. And these priorities represent the features that a curriculum must have in order to best meet the needs of our students. The success of this work is built upon the foundation laid by many of these organizations, these educational organizations that you see here. We used reviews from Ed Reports and from the New Mexico Public Education Department to inform our work. We relied on Achieve the Core and the New Mexico PED rubrics as well to evaluate our materials. This year we had a new rubric, that's the structured literacy rubric. And that one was used to eliminate programs that did not meet our requirements. Yeah, we were still there, sorry. Around foundational skills. And as you know, we've been doing a lot of work with foundational skills, and our K-2 teachers have been working through letters. And so this rubric was foundational in finding a program that had those foundational skills necessary. So once we identified our top 3 finalists, we then went into the IMET rubric, where we evaluated a set of non-negotiable features, such as high quality texts, building knowledge, and access to standards for all students. And at the end of it, CKLA was the only program among the 3 finalists that was rated as meets on all non-negotiables. Thank you. So as you'll see, our process is quite lengthy. It did take an entire year. But the knowledge and insight to make a well-informed decision for our students and teachers was laid out here before you. Our work will continue into the coming summer with the development of curriculum materials and introductory professional learning sessions. We also held a virtual open house. This happened from March 7th to March 18th. And if you click one more time, for some reason we have a fly-in in there. I apologize. Thank you. Right there. We invited staff, parents, and community members to review our 3 finalists online and provide feedback. We received more than 140 responses from the community. And so you'll see here that in the blue pie chart at the top, CKLA came out on top with our community as well. And then on April 6th, we brought our adoption committee together for our final vote, where 91% of our committee voted for CKLA. So tonight we seek board approval to adopt Amplify, Core Knowledge Language Arts, and Caminos, which is its Spanish counterpart. Thank you. I'll have Todd Rush come.
Thank you, Joy. Board President Galbraith, members of the board, Superintendent Cleveland, tonight is a celebration of the year's worth of work culminating this evening in front of you, of over 25 people, dedicated people, who have carefully selected instructional materials for this district for the next 6 years in the area of ELA. We are proud to share with you the members of our committee this year for our ELA and reading intervention teams. For ELA, please note the equitable distribution of members across all campuses and grade levels. Our members were intentionally selected to ensure that we had representation from both English language development and special education. It needs to be noted now that the facilitator of the ELA adoption is Mrs. Erica Lozano, our ELA coordinator. Erica, will you please stand? Erica was hired 1 week before the process started, and she has done a brilliant job in facilitating the ELA adoption process. The team's role was to serve as a positive and informative representative for this process on their campus. Our Reading Intervention Adoption Committee members were selected in a similar fashion, just as with the ELA. Please note again the diverse and equitable distribution of members from all 4 campuses, which included English language development and special education. And again, please, I'd like to take a moment to recognize the facilitator, Mrs. Jeanette Gonzalez. Jeanette, would you please stand? Thank you very much, Jeanette. So the role of these members were in lockstep with ELA. And if any of the members on the committee are here tonight from ELA or Reading Intervention, would you please stand? Okay. They're probably resting. Well, before we dive any further into this process, we wanted to begin with what we know everyone is asking. What did we choose? What did we select? And for middle school ELA, the committee recommends to you this evening New Mexico into Literature, published by Houghton Mifflin Harcourt. And our Reading Intervention Committee recommends I Ready Reading, published by Curriculum Associates. There are hundreds of publishers and organizations that offer materials in ELA and Reading Intervention. The adoption process used here in Rio Rancho provides steps that help streamline and narrow the choices, beginning with the approved list published by the New Mexico Public Education Department. This slide shows the sources consulted to conduct an initial sift of resources for the committee to review. From these sources, we identified instructional materials that scored only the highest category of review for both instructional design and culturally and linguistically responsive content. Now that we've received how our materials are and how they're selected and evaluated, we'd like to showcase the process and its timelines. So adopting curriculum resources in Rio Rancho is a district process that all grade levels and content areas follow to ensure high quality instructional materials are selected for students and teachers. While the process is lengthy, it provides the committee and the community the time and space to thoroughly vet and evaluate options for adoption. The next slide showcases the priorities set by our ELA team. Priorities, combined with the rubric criteria, were used to ensure that our recommended resource was not only in alignment with the principles of a guaranteed and viable curriculum, but also with the needs of teachers and students at our middle school campuses at the forefront of our recommendation. These are the priorities adopted by our Reading Intervention Committee. No worries. The Reading Intervention priorities focused on the 5 components of literacy: phonemic awareness, phonics, vocabulary, fluency, and comprehension. And next up, here you will see the opportunities that we provided for community feedback. Due to the challenges presented by the pandemic, we had to reimagine portions of this process. Our committee facilitators developed a website that allowed the Rio Rancho community the opportunity to engage in the review process over a 2-week period of time. On this site, individuals could review student and teacher accounts, as well as submit their feedback, input, and questions. All of this information was advertised and promoted through district communication, as well as through the community parent advisory team in the weeks leading up to the website's publication. This supported the continuous stream of feedback generated from committee members sharing this process and potential materials with their colleagues at weekly PLC meetings. And then finally, as you consider our recommendation, we'd like to reiterate that these materials will be used by staff and students over the next 6 years. And here's the breakdown of what was included in each adoption recommendation. And next up is Mr. Carl Leppelman. Thank you.
Thank you, Todd. Madam President, members of the board, Dr. Cleveland. It almost feels like I can't hear myself, but maybe it's the acoustics in here. I hear, okay, great. Dr. Cleveland alluded to the fact that we are $1 million short. Here's the good news. The good news is we had $35 million last year distributed across the entire state. Secretary Steinhaus had $5 million addition in his budget, so that adds up to $40 million. So I'll make it real quickly. Dr. Cleveland and I went to the Secretary of Education, actually wrote a letter, as you know, and we were hopefully getting more. The number was much higher than that because we took the entire distribution across the state and determined approximately what the entire state would need, was close to around $65 million. But unfortunately, that bill, it was during the legislative session, but it didn't get picked up and it didn't move. So it did move a little bit. We got 3 million more. So every million helps across the state. So again, I think at this point in time that I have to commend the district superintendent of making this recommendation tonight, given the budget as tight as it is, given the fact we have additional funds. But this is a commitment that this district has made for many, many years now. So I want to thank everybody and make sure that we'll continue to fight to get additional funding. I think it's something that Secretary Steinhaus is open to, but going to the next legislative session, even though we're higher at 43 million, we really need to get this up. And so I would just ask that everybody out there who's listening speak to their legislators around how we can get the tools and the resources teachers need. So with that, we'll stand for questions.
Okay. So
Oh,
before
I'm sorry, we actually planning. We do have some plans. We have plans on how to implement. So Joy, do we have some plans that we'd like to implement? And Todd, yes, thank you.
You know, one of the things that we're very proud about coming out of the CNI department is that we work with a wonderful group that is always planning the next phase. So we are already looking forward to the next phase of this process. So for elementary, we'll be spending some time this summer working on our draft curriculum documents. We hope to plan training and implementation this summer, already working with looking at what our calendar will look like for some of that and getting a jump start on some training. And then, of course, we'll be having some ongoing job embedded support throughout the school year for the new materials if we get approved tonight. So.
And
Middle school.
the same can be said for middle school.
Ditto. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, so first I'd like to go to Dr. Cleveland and see, Dr. Cleveland, do you want to add any additional comments?
You did a really comprehensive job. Thank you both and the whole team for all of the work that was into it. Really, when a recommendation comes, we have real confidence in it because they have done their homework. And I want to thank everyone who served on the committee to bring this forward. Again, we'll stress how very important the English language arts is to student performance and why that we really have a need for those materials. Also really hopeful that we will see that money come back to us at the regular session. Hopefully that it will pass. I do want to say in all fairness, the Secretary worked really hard to try to get this money for us and we were appreciative of that. Hopefully to make another run at it, but we do, one of the other things that I do plan once the board is approved is to send a letter to Secretary Steinhaus delineating all the things that we had to cut in order to make this $1 million work for instructional materials. And so that he has that and he can share that with others. So once if the board approves this, then I will send that letter, if you all approve of that, listing what we had to cut in order to make it a reality.
All right. Well, thank you. And I'll go for questions. I just have to say, I'm so glad that you showed everyone here who has been a part of the process. I could look out and see all these faces that I haven't seen before. And so it's really nice to be able to know who they all are. And so thank you for pointing them out. So we'll go to questions. We'll start with Jessica Tyler, if you have any questions.
I don't necessarily have any questions, just comments on making sure, and I know you guys had put that in your planning in the support for the teachers in implementing this curriculum, because obviously our teachers are very stressed still from the pandemic and taking on a new challenge of adopting new curriculum, even though it's very exciting and needed, it's an added stressor to them. So just want to make sure that we support our teachers well in the implementation of the new curriculum.
Yeah, thank you. Jeff Morgan, any questions, comments?
I don't have any questions, but just want to say thanks to you and your team for the work you've done. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks. And then Noreen Scott, any questions? It's weird because I can't see her. Okay. And Gary Tripp, do you have any questions?
No questions. Great job. Excellent report. Thank you very much.
This is Noreen Scott. I did have a question. With regard to the curriculum chosen, was there another curriculum that would have stayed within the budget that we have to spend? I guess that question is for Carl.
Secretary Scott, no was the answer. In the terms of our second place, particularly at elementary, it did not meet the actual reading foundational skills that core knowledge did. It was not comprehensive in terms of also the content. I'd probably ask Mr. Rush to talk more at the middle school level, HMH. Yeah.
HMH was there was a complete vote, 100% confidence to support HMH. They vetted through all the processes that the NMPED had and various rubrics. The committee was 100% behind HMH.
Did any school districts in the state try to keep within a budget rather than the curriculum that they chose? I'm just curious, since we were short money.
That's a great question. I don't know for certain. I do know that core knowledge at the elementary is very, we've reached out to Farmington, Roswell, some other districts that are trying to move their proficiency in reading, and they've all actually selected core knowledge. And I want to talk about other publishers, but the second and third place candidates, I do not believe are getting much support across the state. I don't know that answer. I could probably reach out to some districts and find out. At the middle school, I don't know. No, he doesn't know of any other districts that might be choosing or selecting another material that might stay in their budget. One thing that I think I'd like to make a point of is it all flows to the SEG now. And because it's in the SEG, each district gets funded at a different level, the same textbook, Dr. Cleveland times, and that's not really what we want to see across the state. I used to have the instructional material budget as a separate of the SEG. Actually would recommend us going forward as a legislative proposal that looking at moving it back that way so that basically there aren't winners and losers in that sense, because some districts might actually have enough to adopt fully CKLA, for example, and we may not. And that I don't think is is fair to the student teachers across the state. So I think that's something that needs to be addressed a little bit going forward. Yeah.
And my second question is, where is the $1 million coming from to
Hey, Noreen,
deal
hold on
with-
1 second. Go ahead, Dr. Cleveland.
Well, go ahead, Noreen, if you have a question.
Well, I think you can answer this as part of yours. Where will the $1 million come from that we have as a shortfall right now if the state does not come up with the money?
It'd be cash carryover in terms of cash. Is that right, Mr. Baker?
It all goes in one big pot, so.
Be that money that's in that 16 million, I think the budget there, that would actually be that cash carryover.
Thank you for answering my question.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
And let me just add that, historically in New Mexico, instructional materials was a separate budget. And they calculated what each district would need to be able to buy those materials that were on the state list. And we can only buy materials that are on the state list. That's, we don't have the choice of going other places. We have to buy that. So it would seem reasonable and rational that you would calculate out what it costs each district to buy the books, because it's a surprise to other materials. Certainly not a surprise to anyone that the book costs the same for Rio Rancho as it does for Farmington, or as it does for Las Cruces. The cost is the same. And so when you send it through the formulas, as Mr. Leppelman was saying, different districts get different amounts when the cost is the same. And so pulling it back out of that formula makes a lot of sense. I think the rationale behind it was to give higher need districts more opportunity to buy more supplemental materials to meet the needs of their special populations. But the reality of it is there's not enough money even to cover the basic materials. So that goal, while a very admirable goal, did not ever work out. And so you really need to fund those special populations outside of the regular textbook adoption process. Certainly those supplies and materials are needed for some districts, but it makes absolutely no sense to give one district less money for the same materials as another, knowing that those materials do not vary in cost and that you don't have any choice. You have to buy those materials. So I hope in long term we can get the process reversed, go back to where it's standalone. And it's really not a hard process. You know, what you would do is you cost it out and you'd send the state how much it costs. They would audit those costs and then they'd send you the check. That was a little simpler and a whole lot easier process to ensure that materials were covered fairly for every district. And then my last comment on that is that was one of the rulings of the Yazzie Martinez lawsuit. The state would pay for instructional materials, and Judge Singleton was very clear about that obligation that the state of New Mexico had for providing materials to all students and a full adoption in those adoption cycles. So that's just something the state will have to continue, hopefully, to work on.
Could I add one last thing? I know we're taking too much time tonight, but in terms of Secretary Scott's question, if you took all of the publishers that the state approved and took an average, when we take the amount of money we are using per pupil, are in terms of students, the cost of the materials we're actually recommending tonight, it's at the average, it's not the high end or the low end. So it's in the middle, so to speak, in terms of where those particular materials would fall. So there's higher cost materials than HMAs and there's lower cost materials. So that might be helpful in terms of that price point.
Yeah, no, that's
It is. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from anyone? Okay.
Good, thanks.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate it. We will be voting on that later in the meeting today. Okay. And for our next item, we'll go to item H to approve the consent agenda. Any discussion or questions on the consent?
Board Member Jeff Morgan, I make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Board Member
This is
Jessica Tyler.
Secretary Noreen.
Yeah. Do you want to finish yours? You can go ahead and finish. Did you finish it? Okay. All right. So we have a motion by Jeffrey Morgan, a second by Jessica Tyler for approval. Kim, can you take a roll call vote for us?
I sure can. And Jeff seconded that, right?
It was Jeff gave the motion and
And
Jessica
the
Tyler
second.
did the
Okay,
second.
thank you.
Yeah.
Vice President Morgan,
Yes.
Secretary Scott,
Yes.
Board Member Tripp,
Yes.
Board Member Tyler,
Yes.
and President Galbraith.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Thank you. Okay, moving into our business portion. First, we have a report. The Rancho Public Schools Board of Education met in closed executive session at 4 p.m. on Monday, April 25th, 2022, for the purpose of discussing limited personnel matters as permitted under Section 10-15-1H2 of the New Mexico Open Meetings Act. The matters discussed in the closed meeting were limited only to those specified in the notice of the separate closed meeting. And then for B, consider approval of the unapproved 4/11/2022 redistricting workshop minutes. Any changes that anyone saw that needs to take place on those minutes? We can go to a motion.
Board Member Jeff Morgan, I make a motion to approve the unapproved April 11, 2022 redistrict workshop minutes.
We have a second.
Board Member Jessica Tyler will second.
Okay. And Kim, can we take a roll call vote for us?
Vice President Morgan,
Yes.
Secretary Scott,
Yes.
Board Member Tripp,
Yes.
Board Member Tyler,
Yes.
and President Galbraith.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Thank you. Next is to consider the approval of the unapproved April 11th, 2022 regular board meeting minutes. Any changes on that, on those minutes?
Board Member Jeff Morgan, I make a motion to approve the unapproved April 11, 2022 regular board meeting minutes.
This is Secretary Noreen Scott. I second.
Okay, we have a motion by Jeffrey Morgan and a second by Noreen Scott. And Kim, if you could take a roll call vote for us.
Vice President Morgan.
Yes.
Secretary Scott.
Yes.
Board Member Tripp.
Yes.
Board Member Tyler.
Yes.
And President Galbraith.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Okay, thank you. And we will now move to item E, since we're not doing item D, to consider the adoption of a redistricting plan for Rancho Public Schools, school board member districts. And so we have here, I don't know if Beth is here tonight, but we do have Michael Sharp, our research and polling. From research and polling, we also have Kim Besley, our assistant to the superintendent, to present this item. And we will discuss and take action on this tonight.
Yeah, I think Michael is hooking up his maps just in case
That is
you would like to look at any of them.
okay. I'll give you a second. Michael, do you want to introduce things or how would you like for us to go into it? It's been a process. I mean, how many weeks have we? I think we've had 4 meetings. Hmm?
Thank you, President Galbraith. I guess for tonight, it's kind of really up to the board. We've already talked about the redistricting principles a lot, in a lot of detail. And then we've talked about the plans in a lot of detail. And so we could just make it a straight question and answer. I guess I can make a few introductory comments just to say it's been a process. We've introduced the plans, talked about the principles, had a lot of public meetings, opportunities for the public to participate and provide comments. And then it's really now, I guess, up to the board.
Okay, well, that's good. Kim, have you, so I know that we saw a couple of public comments and I received a couple of emails. Have you received anything else from the school district as far as the maps go?
There were 3 public comments, I think, sorry about that alluded to redistricting. And I think you reviewed those during public comment.
I did.
And as noted, several of them were concerned about whether this might have an impact on school attendance areas. These are 2 separate things, as Dr. Cleveland noted in her report. So the board districts is strictly the areas that you all represent as board members, and it doesn't have anything to do with attendance boundaries.
Okay. Yes. Thank you. I know I even responded to a couple of emails like, this will not affect your school. This will not affect your school. Dr. Cleveland, any comments before the board goes into?
No, I think that what is needed now is if the board has any preference among the maps, to hear what those are and have a chance to talk about it and discuss it and hopefully get this task behind us.
Yes. Yes, that will be good. Okay. So we have 3 options that we narrowed it down to. I believe it was, let's see if we can remember, it was B, D, and E. Is that correct? B, D, and E. And so now tonight we need to choose one of those and vote on it. So just to start, I'll go over to Jessica Tyler just to see if she has a preference or comments, questions that you have for Michael who's here or any of those things.
I would just say that the only comments that I did see is that, some feedback requested that we did try to take into consideration of keeping neighborhoods together. And I think most of the maps did that in the best fashion that they could while still meeting the other criteria. So I think all of the plans, that we brought forth for public comment have their pros and cons. And so I don't have any strong feelings necessarily one way or the other.
Okay, thank you. Jeff Morgan, any questions, comments, thoughts?
Not at all.
Okay. Okay. Noreen, or do you have any questions or comments, thoughts you want to share with the board?
Yes, I wonder if there was a vehicle for people to give input who came to look at the plans. Did we get any input from people who said, 35 people voted for B or 20 people voted for F, whatever it was?
I think, yeah, go ahead, Kim.
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah, so I know we had them posted in the library. I don't know if they had a specific way to comment on each of them other than the board form where they could give comment. So, okay. And Gary Tripp, anything you want to add?
No, I just want to know what the feeling of somebody who's going to make a recommendation. 'Cause, I'm good with any one of the three options that we chose, and I don't think the community has an issue with them.
Okay.
But thank you.
Okay. Thank you. So I really have been looking at, I like all of them and I don't have a huge preference. B, I like just because it doesn't change a whole lot. And so I like that one. But at the same time, I don't feel that the numbers wise, it's very, so it's up on the screen right now. I don't feel like it helps us as much with the changes maybe that we might need for the next 10 years until that next census. So that's why I kind of lean towards E, where we talked about that in our last meeting, that it really balances out those numbers better for us. It's a drastic change, especially to my district. It's a drastic change. So, but those are my thoughts just as we go in. I think I'm kind of partial to E just because it does balance those numbers out well.
And as I look at them one more time tonight, I feel I'm actually leaning, I think, towards Plan D, because while it is still some drastic changes, not as drastic as E, but also still very much so balances the numbers to where I think there won't have the need for drastic changes in another 10 years, although we don't have a crystal ball. But so I think I'm leaning towards D.
Okay. You're supposed to just agree with me. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I like D. As I'm looking at D2, I think you're right. I didn't really think of it. It's not as drastic of changes, but still does balance them out really well. So if anyone else has comments, please feel free to come on and give those comments.
I have
please.
one bit of added notation that I just got, and the vehicle there was the invitation to the board to either come to there was an invitation to either come to the board meeting or to comment online.
Okay.
That was included with the maps at the library.
And I did see that all go out to the district, to the parents and all those things. So yeah. So thank you, Kim, for that. Thank you. Other thoughts? Well, does anyone else have any questions or any other considerations? I'm looking into the vast yonder because there's two board members who aren't in. Somehow they are in the ceiling is where I'm looking for them tonight. So,
Madam President, this is Board Member Tyler. I'd like to make a motion that we approve Plan D, as in David, for the adoption of the redistricting plan for Rio Rancho Public School board member districts.
This is Board Member Gary Tripp. I'll second that.
Okay. We have a motion by Jessica Tyler, a second by Gary Tripp. And Kim, why don't you go ahead and take a roll call vote for us on this motion?
Vice President Morgan.
Yes.
Secretary Scott.
Yes.
Board Member Tripp.
Yes.
Board Member Tyler.
Yes.
And President Galbraith.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Thank you. Yay, everyone, let's all applaud. This is a happy day. This is a happy day. And thank you so much, Michael, for coming out for all this. Do you have any closing comments you'd like to give?
No, not really. President Galbraith, it was great to work with the school district, I think, for the third or fourth time. And and especially was great as well to work with and putting all the information up on the web for the public and help me out with assisting the board. So it's been fantastic. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. We really appreciate all the work that you've done. And we really appreciate Kim too, and all the work that she's put forth and meeting with us too individually and all of those things.
And I would like to thank Michael as well. And we will be putting this information up on the website in the very near future. We'll be changing those maps. So
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Michael. Okay. Moving into our next item is, sorry, I have to look at F. Thank you. And my notes are all over my page, so it's hard to look through. So F, so we'll consider the approval of the preliminary fiscal year 23, so the 2022-2023 budget. Michael Baker, our Chief Operations Officer, is here to present with us.
Okay, Claudia, can you make that a little bit bigger and clearer, please? Can you make that a little bit bigger and clearer?
Noreen Scott, you might want to mute your microphone.
Oh, you had it.
Oh,
I am muted.
never mind. I can't see who you are. So Gary Tripp, you might want to mute.
Okay, President Galbraith, Dr. Cleveland, members of the school board. So this evening, I'd like to do a cursory review of the 22-23 fiscal year operational budget for Rio Rancho Public Schools. We have met on 2 occasions with the Finance Committee to review this budget. And what I want to talk about first is the total revenue. And as you can see up on the screen in green is a snapshot of our revenue. The total is just under $203 million. Most of that revenue comes from SEG, or the State Equalization Guarantee, in the amount of approximately $185 million. Other revenue sources come to approximately $1.5 million, and our cash carry comes to approximately $16 million. So let me spend a little bit time on cash carry, what that is, and how we come up with that number and what we do with that. So different jurisdictions may use a different terminology. PED uses the term cash carry. Other jurisdictions, for example, would use beginning fund balance or ending fund balance. That may almost be a better descriptor of actually where that money is. So when you go through your entire budget year, typically you should have some money left over, just money unspent. And typically most of that money that's not spent comes from vacancy savings. In our particular case, during the 21-22 fiscal year, the fiscal year we're in right now, we had approximately $5 million in vacancy savings. And I say approximate because we still have a couple of months to go yet. But typically we have a pretty good handle on what our vacancy savings is going to be for the next 2 months. And we already know what it has been for 10 months. So we estimate that at approximately $5 million. Something kind of unique happened this year. And that was that the PED at mid-year, they actually gave us more money. And what happens by statute, the PED, they are required to essentially reconcile the SEG. And if the state has more money, that money gets distributed in January through the SEG, through the rest of the school districts. However, if they've issued out too much money, they may have to claw back some money. And so sometimes that SEG, the unit value, some years it may increase and some years it may decrease. And typically those numbers are fairly marginal. They're not that great. This particular year, the number was rather large. It was very surprising. We did not anticipate that. And we received approximately $7 million in addition to the budget that was originally awarded. In addition to that, we were also received an additional $1 million for an additional ERB payment that we did not anticipate. So that's $8 million that we did not anticipate. On top of that, there was approximately $3 million that departments in schools don't spend in their operational. And that roughly comes out to about $16 million. So it's 16 million that we have right now that is unspent. It's budgeted, but it's unspent. And that money will carry over into next year. And so typically some jurisdictions will call that a beginning fund balance. That's how we start the year. We start the year with the funding that was carried over from the previous fiscal year. In our case, it's a little bit over $16 million. Now, the kind of the good and the bad, with a large, fairly large 16 million beginning fund balance, it's kind of good and it's bad. It's good that we have the funding to start, but we also use that money to balance the next year's budget. And so what happens is sometimes when that number is rather large, and that is likely not to recur the following year, you kind of rely on that money to balance your budget. And so we rely on unspent funding to balance the budget. And that's a normal thing. But this year, we expected that number to actually not be 16 million. But like I said, it was that because of the additional SEG that we got. So what do we do with that 16 million? It basically goes back into the gigantic budget pot, so to speak, and it gets disseminated throughout the entire district and it gets budgeted. And then we go through the same process as we're going through the budget. We execute the budget, we spend money, and typically we don't spend everything that's allocated. And the reason for that is what happens is even though we have, all of our personnel budgeted, not all that personnel gets hired. And people resign during the year, and sometimes it's very difficult to fill those positions. And then in the environment that we've been in since COVID, our vacancy savings has gone up quite a bit just because it's been very difficult to maintain employees and to actually get people back to work, to be honest with you. And so that number has been rather large. And so the downside of that cash carry is that we do rely on it. We do rely on it to balance our budget. And so what happens if that number drastically decreases the following year, then we're anticipating, let's say, total revenue to include cash carry of 203, but we may not have 203. We may have something less than that. And so we'll see what next year brings us. But essentially, that's how that cash carry is derived, and that's how it is used in the following school year. So that's revenue. And school board policy also says that we are to put away approximately 2% of our operational budget. And so approximately $4.1 million is set aside in a reserve fund in case there's cash flow problems typically, or other issues where we need to cut the budget for a variety of reasons. And as you know, the state of New Mexico is heavily reliant on gas and oil, and gas and oil has greatly fluctuated in the last couple of years. And right now the state has been flush with additional revenue because of gas and oil. It was just a short time before that, just the opposite occurred, where the state coffers were dwindling because there weren't funding for that. So the reserve is put aside in case we have those type of issues and we need to rebalance the budget. On the expenditure side, again, you see that expenditures revenue match, or there's a balancing. So again, the expenditure side is just under 203 million. Salary and benefits make up by far the majority of what we do, and that's very, very typical of a service-oriented entity such as public school systems. Schools and departments make up about 44 million, salary and benefits a bit over 158 million, for a total expenditure of 200, just under 203 million. The difference between revenue and expenditures at this time is 0. If you can just, yeah, up a little bit less. So some of the mandatory budget additions, and typically, as you know, what happens in Santa Fe is they will set aside new money for new initiatives. Those initiatives were, for the most part, salary increases for employees and pretty substantial raises for teachers. That came, the teacher additions were raised from the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, 50, 60, and 70,000 for extended learning time. School districts such as ours, those numbers were approximately, I believe, about 5% greater than the minimum. So everything that the state passed in regard to budget, we do have in our current budget. There's a 3% salary increase that is supposed to occur this year. So that is in this year's budget to be expended. That 3% also carries over into next year into employees' annual salaries as well. On top of that, the legislature required us to add an additional 4% salary increase for employees, and ELTP districts such as ours were to add another 3% on top of that. And the way it was structured, the 3%, then the 4%, then the 3%, essentially what happens is you have this compounding that goes on. So you would say, okay, well, that's 10%, but it's really 10.33%. And so other than the minimums that were established by the legislature, employees will get essentially a 10.33% annual adjustment to their base salary. Then on top of that, the legislature approved an ERB adjustment for districts only to increase it by 2%. And then medical benefits increased district payments of approximately 6%. So totaling those mandatory budget additions came to a bit over $24 million. If you can scroll up a little bit down. So some of the what's in this budget, most, of course, by far the majority of funding went to take care of those mandatory budget adjustments. Some of the things that also were put in the budget or are noteworthy in the budget, career technical education. As you know, we bought a beautiful facility. We hope to have it at least phase 1 operational by next year. Operational costs will cost us approximately $2 million. I really wanted to set aside something like about $1 million this year, but because it was so difficult to balance the budget, we're going to set aside $500,000 to offset the impact next year. If we have additional savings, we will we could add to that account. Software and IT, of course, is a big deal. And every day you listen to the news and there's a cyber attack, there's ransomware here and there. APS got hit, Las Cruces got hit, Bernalillo County got hit. So it's not at these places that are far and away, but in our backyard. And so we have to be very, very aware of that, and we have to be prepared for that. So just for information purposes, our software budget is approximately $3.3 million. Our IT budget had to increase because of protecting the network. And as you know, everything we do nowadays is technology, in some form of technology. And so we have to protect our network. And so we put the funding to ensure that that occurred. Our transportation deficit, unfortunately, is taking a pretty big hit this year at approximately 1,850,000. That's an estimate. If gas prices continue to go up, one day they go up, one day they go down. We'll see what happens over the year. But also with the salary increases, our transportation deficit has increased pretty substantially. Instructional materials, you just heard the presentation on instructional materials. So we had to add to the budget, and that's approximately $3 million. Chromebooks, again, technology is kind of forefront. Chromebooks, actually this year we'll actually get a new set of Chromebooks that cost approximately $2.3 million. And so we had to retire thousands of Chromebooks this year because Google no longer supports those Chromebooks. And again, that is one way that we maintain our integrity in the system and our security in the system, is to have up-to-date hardware as well as software. And finally, in order to maintain school class sizes, we're adding 17 teachers. And in order to do that, there were some positions, some vacant positions that were eliminated in order to assist us with balancing the budget. So those are the big changes. And at this point, I'd just like to stand for questions.
Okay, thank you, Mike. This has been a big, long process. And so we're really grateful to you and your team for all the time that you've put into it. I'd like to first go over to Dr. Cleveland and if she has any comments before we get into questions.
Now let's go ahead and let the board.
Okay.
And then I might have some at
Okay.
the end. but
Okay.
I prefer to let the board ask questions.
Okay. Sounds good. Jeff Morgan.
I have no questions, Mike. Thanks for your work. Greatly appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you. Jessica Tyler.
No questions, just a comment. Just want to reiterate to the public that we have spent 2 other meetings on going over this information. A lot of the information was delayed as we were waiting for the final funding factors from the PED to come down. And so thank you all for your work of getting this done in a timely fashion, even though we had delays in getting it to us. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And Jessica Tyler is our finance chair, so we appreciate all that you've done too. Noreen Scott, any questions, comments?
Just a quick question, Mr. Baker, when we receive money like from the legislature, where does that money show up on the budget? Like, for instance, the 350 we received for CTE, where does it go?
It typically will not go. There'll be a separate accounting for that, and I can once we get that in kind of a special fund, I'll let you know specifically where it is, but that will be kind of off to the side, that additional funding that comes from the legislature. So that is not part of what you're looking at right now.
I'd also like to say thank you for the very professional way we've been able to work through the budget as a board. Your input has been very valuable. Thank you.
Okay, Gary Tripp, any questions?
No questions, Mike. Thank you, and thank everybody.
Okay, thank you. I have a quick question. As we look at the Chromebooks, I mean, is this? I guess I want to keep it in our minds on how sustainable as we see that. Is this with Google? I mean, how often? Do we have any idea how often we're going to have to buy these new Chromebooks if they keep changing their,
their business model?
Yeah. Yes, there you go.
It's important that they make a lot of money. So, yeah. So I think what they're looking at really is like every 3 years. And so we've had discussion about this program, and that it's a valuable program, but is it really sustainable? And so we talked about maybe approaching the state and saying, you know what, Chromebooks probably should be a part of instructional material. and that the state should have some separate funding in order to sustain something like this. And I can tell you, as we moved through COVID, the network, IT, and Chromebooks, they were invaluable.
It's true.
Invaluable. So, and as we move in a more technologically advanced society, I don't know how we can do without them. So it's it's kind of certainly it's a predicament that we are in.
Yeah. Have we looked at other, I know the Chromebooks are probably the least expensive and we use, the Google suite, all of those things in Google. Are there other options though out there that we could look at in the future? Which would be a whole replacement again.
Yeah, I know there are other options. I don't know if it would really save us that much money. And we do an RFP typically every year. So we try to get the best price and the best product.
Okay. Go
So
ahead.
much of the educational software is tied to Google,
Yes.
and they have made a real effort to dominate in that arena. And so so much of our materials are compatible with Google and not always compatible with the other. There's also one other issue that they've been alluded to. One is certainly the phasing out of and support of Chromebooks, but the other is a problem that we have internally, and that is the issue of loss and damage. And it exceeds what we anticipated that it was going to be. So that's another factor that we're having to look at, how we maintain them, how we replace them. And we've looked at some options, but unfortunately, we don't think those options may be legal to look at. But we certainly we're experiencing more loss and damage than we had originally hoped would be the case.
Dr. Cleveland, on that, I did notice this year as I registered my students that there's a new option, or it's not an option directly within the registration, but there is information on insurance basically that parents can purchase for that replacement. And I thought that was a wise thing to be available to our community.
It really is. And unfortunately, we don't have many parents taking advantage of it. But we're going to really push that next year because it certainly saves the parents a lot of time and grief when it's lost, and it's just automatically replaced. And it also does not put our staff in the position of having to just always be after people to pay that. But it is a material, and it does owned by the state. And so we have a legal responsibility to take care of that. But I really hope more parents will take advantage of it because it's, I think, $24 a year, very reasonable. And there's just absolutely no questions when it's lost or damaged, it's replaced. We'd like to require it, but may not be able to do that. So we'll put a big push this year, get more parents to take advantage of it. The only other thing I would just say about the budget, it's a really hard budget year, and that it's hard to make sense of that when you see a significant increase in funding. And you think, well, then how can it be so hard? And it's hard because of mandates. It's hard because of the mandated raises. None of us were opposed to that. Everybody was thrilled with that. It would have been great, though, if we'd had a little more money come as a result of it. But we have other mandated raises, costs. The ERB increase is significant, and we've got that, and we have to do that. There's just several things that we're required to do. So that's what takes up the resources. And unfortunately, there's not been a lot left for some of the other things we would really like to do in terms of innovation and creative kinds of things we would like to see in our classrooms. But again, I certainly don't want to appear ungrateful for the increase in compensation, because I think that's making a huge difference. I think it will as we rebuild the workforce. And just like many others, just like healthcare, like there are many other organizations, we are having to rebuild our workforce pretty much. And so we need that. One of my goals next year, I mean, if you had to ask me about all the things I would like to see, it'd be a highly qualified teacher in every classroom. That'd be number one priority. We could, but we have many other needs as well. And so we'll be sharing with you some of the things we're doing to try to make that a reality for next year. You are probably very much aware that the state is stepping forward Now we have 4 years of college. That's just your tuition, but 4 years of college is now paid for. But there are many specific grants that will not only cover tuition, but also all of your materials, supplies, even transportation in some cases for students that want to work in the field of education, especially certain groups of students. Really encourage young people if they're interested in education. You can pretty much get through with very little cost. And we would love to see more people going back into the field the traditional way. That being said, those options will take 4 or 5 years before we're going to see any benefit from them. And so we've got, at least in those 3 to 4 years, 5 years, look at alternative certification. It's really the only way we're going to bring new people in or recruit people back. And I think one of the nicest things that we are seeing, Mike Chavez has shared that with me, and is that we are seeing some folks who left the state in the last few years indicate a desire to come back to New Mexico now that compensation is a little better. And we're really hoping that some of those folks will come home. We still have a lot of wonderful things to offer as a state, and with better compensation, we are getting some calls from people who have been working for the last several years in other states who are interested in coming back. So we hope that in the next 4 years, we'll start really seeing some significant gains in terms of folks coming through the traditional route of colleges of arts and science and education to, in the next few years, working really hard and looking at alternative certifications. So I think it's optimistic for on down the road, excited about that. We still got a lot of challenges in the next few years to get to that point.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions from the board? Okay. If someone would like to give a motion.
Board Member Jessica Tyler, I'll make a motion to approve the preliminary fiscal year 23, school year 2022, 2023 budget.
This is Secretary Noreen Scott. I'll second it.
Okay. So we have a motion by Jessica Tyler and a second by Noreen Scott. And then Kim, if you take a roll call vote for us.
Vice President Morgan,
Yes.
Secretary Scott,
Yes.
Board Member Tripp,
Yes.
Board Member Tyler,
Yes.
and President Galbraith.
Yes.
The motion carries 5-0.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mike.
Okay, thank you. And certainly want to thank everybody that participated. We had a lot of people that participated in this budget. Certainly like to really thank, the HR department, finance department, our school improvement officers as well. It's a grueling process, and everybody kind of gets hurt a little bit in the process when you're trying to balance. But anyway, so we're glad to be there, and I think next year we'll just have another good year.
Thank you so much. I hope you guys can sleep tonight. Maybe get a little bit of rest. And thank you. Thank you. Okay, now to item G, to consider the adoption of the K through 8 English Language Arts, the ELA instruction materials. We have Carl Leppelman, our Chief Academic Officer, here to present.
Sorry, President Galbraith, members of the board, Dr. Cleveland. So we did the recommendations before you. We made a report. You've seen the materials we're recommending. So if you have any questions, I'm here to answer them.
Are there any further questions from anyone on the ELA adoption? Okay. If there's a motion.
This is Secretary Noreen Scott. I move approval of the ELA English language curriculum.
Board Member Gary Tripp, I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion by Noreen Scott and a second by Gary Tripp. And then Kim, if you take a roll call vote for us.
Vice President Morgan,
Yes.
Secretary Scott,
Yes.
Board Member Tripp,
Yes.
Board Member Tyler,
Yes.
and President Galbraith.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Okay, motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you to everyone, especially everyone who's here tonight who helped in that process. We're really grateful. Dr. Cleveland, do you want to say anything before? Okay. Okay.
Thanks to everyone.
Yeah, thank you. I know it's been a long process as we went through the pandemic to get through all of that. And so we really, really are grateful for that. Okay, so next is, and last is our item H, which is consider the opening of Martin Luther King Jr. Elementary School and Puesta del Sol Elementary and closing Rio Rancho Middle School to student transfer requests for next year. And so we have Janice Chenault, our elementary school improvement officer, also Renee Salcedo, our secondary school improvement officer. And I'm not sure if Sherry's coming up, and Sherry, okay, and Sherry Carver's here too, our executive director of student services. That I think they can do well.
Good evening, President Galbraith, members of the board, and Dr. Cleveland. So this is actually a celebration too for Puesta del Sol Martin Luther King Jr. Elementary School. We had amazing collaboration between our facilities department and between our administration, the staff, the parents. It's been kind of crazy at those two campuses. They went through, I think Puesta's gone through 4 different phases, which means staff and students had to move 4 different times or different sections of the building. MLK, I think they had 3 phases. We worked with Patrick Martinez, Carl Berglund, Melanie Archibek, and I also want to do a shout out to the administration on those 2 campuses, Jessica Kettler and Noel Caceres at Martin Luther King Jr. And at Puesta del Sol, Tasha Young is the assistant principal and Dana Petro is the principal. It was a wonderful collaboration. I know at MLK they finished early and actually did extra projects with the money. So that's exciting. Having worked there and suffered through some 90 to 93 degrees classrooms, it's going to be wonderful this summer. And so we are excited to open those 2 schools to transfers for the 22-23 school year.
And in that note, we've had a request in speaking with Melanie Archbeck, Executive Director of Facilities, Andy Pierce, who's the principal at Rio Rancho Middle School. We would like to close them for transfers for next year. The only part of that building that's not going to be affected by the HVAC project is the gym. So it's a huge project. They'll be moving kids. So we'd like to close the school for transfers for next year only.
Right. Dr. Cleveland, do you want to add anything today?
No, I just support both. And again, reminding the board, we have an open enrollment statute that is pretty clear about opening to students from out of district when that school is available. Certainly renovations are an important time not to add to the confusion of what we already have. So I think it's very wise to close the building, and it is good to be able to open the other 2. I would add, as I said earlier, the open enrollment works both ways in districts, and it's often a tremendous help to families, and particularly with grandparents or other family situations. So glad to be able to open it. There are some limits. The state does put in the statute some limits. But one of the things that I think is real important for us to remember, it's in the statute that there's room in a classroom. That classroom has not reached the limit set by the state or by the board, then that student has to be admitted. And there's also a list of priorities as to who goes first. If you are interested in looking at that, it is Chapter 22. It's 22-1-4 in the New Mexico Public School Code. If you're just interested, and I'll be glad to send this to the board so that you can review it. But we have always remained in compliance with that statute.
That actually answers my question. So thank you. Well, and that's so like if someone wanted to go to Cleveland or Rio, those can they enroll in those, and what do they do to enroll in those schools? Not that I know it. I'm just curious.
There's transfer forms on the website. So they would just fill out that transfer form.
Okay.
So every other school would be open.
Okay. All right. That is good.
There are restrictions for athletics, however.
Okay.
And in athletics, you have your one free choice.
Mhm.
And most students make that choice before they enter in the 9th grade. If you are a varsity player, you will have to sit out a year. If you transfer into a school in within that process and don't move into that district. So athletics, the NMAA has a different standard for those who participate. And any parent that's interested in moving that has a child involved in varsity sports, we need also to look at the NMAA code before moving. But anyone that moves into your district at any time can immediately enroll in the school district once they have established their residency within the boundaries of our school district. So athletics is a little different situation.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
And we do usually, the high schools have a conversation with that student because usually we know that it's an athlete moving into from one school to another. So we usually have that conversation with the family.
So as long as they're moving, it's okay. But
If they're moving, it's, yeah.
okay, all right.
When they're not, that it's questionable.
And the NMAA is quite skilled at finding out whether that's true or not.
Yeah.
We have found that out on several occasions. So I would encourage people to be absolutely honest in that process, because not to be honest could cost your child eligibility, and no one would want that. So, and I think Sherry Carver is wanting to say something related to that.
We did meet her.
I know.
Board and Dr. Cleveland, I just wanted to reassure parents at Rio Rancho Middle School that if their kids are already attending Rio Rancho Middle School or their siblings are coming in, that those students are going to be approved for the transfer.
Okay, that is a good clarification. Yeah, definitely. Okay. Well, thank you. If there's no questions, and we'll take a motion. Any questions? Okay.
This is Board Member Jeff Morgan. I make a motion for considering opening Martin Luther King Jr. Elementary and Puesta del Sol Elementary and closing Rio Rancho Middle School to student transfer requests for the 2022-2023 school year.
Board Member Tyler will second.
Okay, so we have a motion by Jeff Morgan, a second by Jessica Tyler, and then Kim, if you'll take a roll call vote for us.
Vice President Morgan,
Yes.
Secretary Scott,
Yes.
Board Member Tripp,
Yes.
Board Member Tyler,
Yes.
and President Galbraith.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it. Okay, we're going to go into advanced planning. You good? Okay, going into advanced planning, there are just a couple of changes, so just take note of those. I think they have changed on our calendars, though. Things are different with some of those things. So April 26th, we have an audit evaluation committee to score the proposal. So that will be at 10 a.m. here in this. Is it going to be in this area? And that will just be the audit committee that will be in that.
Yes,
Kim's
just the
looking-
members that are involved in the evaluation.
The 27th will be a legislative reception from 5 to 6:30. That will be at the Rio Rancho High School. I'm guessing in the cafeteria there, right? Okay. April 28th, we have another strategic planning focus group. That one will be at 4 and not at 4:30. Is that correct? That's the one that changed. I'm just going to say
Yes, it's
okay,
at 4.
4 o'clock. So 4 to 7 on that one. April 29th, there's a mandatory board training for open meetings and IPRA. That will be 1 to 4. It's a virtual meeting, and they are supposed to be sending us a link for that. Do you know when they'll be sending that link out?
They said a couple of days before. Is that right, Lauren?
You haven't seen it come through though yet, right? Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
And May 9th, there's an audit committee meeting, 4:30 here in the training center. Also May 9th, there'll be a regular board meeting at 5:30. May 16th will be the board retreat. You will receive information for that. It's at the Enchanted Falls Event Center. That meeting will be at 10 o'clock, not at 8 a.m. It'll start at
9. I think I changed it to 9:30, and that was wrong too.
I thought you had put 10, but yeah, 10 o'clock would be best. Just because I have to teach
Okay.
until just after 9, and I'll be like speeding. So 10 o'clock we'll go with, if that's okay with everyone.
Oh, it's 10 to 2:30.
10
Right.
to 2:30.
Yeah, I sent out a new version of the calendar. I just didn't change it in advanced planning. So my apologies, folks.
You should know. 10 to 2:30.
Okay, thank you. Then we have a whole bunch of graduations coming up. So May 20th, Cyber Academy graduation. I think these are all on the calendar now too, Kim, right? The graduations. Okay, so Cyber Academy graduation, 6 p.m. That will be in Cleveland's Concert Hall. May 23rd will be Cleveland's graduation, 10 a.m. at the Rio Rancho Event Center. Also May 23rd will be Independence graduation. And so we will be kind of going back between those two that day. 1:30 at the Cleveland Concert Hall. May 24th will be Rio Rancho High School's graduation, 10 a.m. at the Rio Rancho Events Center. And then the 27th is the last day of school. The only other thing please make sure that you let Kim know if you're going to the school law conference, just because they have to be able to pay and put everything in for that. So please let her know if you could. When do you want that by? No later than?
Probably we'll send the registration up probably Wednesday.
Okay.
So if you could just let me know, that'd be great.
Okay. Thank you.
Remind everybody about the requirements for training.
Yes, and you do have to have a certain amount of hours for training. Lauren, do you remember the hours? That's what I was thinking too. It's 5 hours for training throughout the year, which honestly it's not too hard to get, but just make sure, I believe they did just send those out to see where we are currently with our training. So just make sure that you are in a good place with your training for the year. And then we have this is a very important one. We make sure that if you haven't yet, that you let them know if you're going to staff recognition dinner. I believe that's also the hall of, what is the, it's the staff recognition and also the Hall of Honor. Okay. And that will be at 5:30 on June 7th. And then we have regular board meetings on the 13th and 27th. Whew, there you go. All right. So with that, our meeting's adjourned for tonight. Thank you. I hate.
Thank you.
Job.